Thank you.
I apologize for not being open today. We have a wedding reception in the museum this afternoon, so my apologies for that. But Will Hillenbrand is a celebrated author and illustrator whose published works include over 60 books for young readers. In addition to his own illustrated titles, he has illustrated the works of writers and retellers including Verna Aardema, Judy Sierra, Judith St. Phyllis Root, Jane Yolen, Karma Wilson, Maureen Wright, Danielle Pinkwater, Olivier Dunrea, and Jane Hillenbrand. In his work, Will uses a combination of traditional drawing methods and digital media, which creates images of art that are much closer to the way they would look in print, thus blurring the line between art and craft and exemplifying the concept of true art. Will has lived most of his life in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he grew up the youngest of 4 boys. He now lives in Terrace Park, Ohio. The Maz Museum, which was stated here at the University of Findlay, is the first and largest collection of original artwork from picture books in the world. We are also proud to call Will Hillenbrand a friend. This friendship started many years ago and has grown over the years. The Maz Museum today has 11 works of art by Will that we are most proud of. Please help me welcome not only a friend to the Maz Museum, but a friend to anyone and everyone that has ever picked up a picture book. Will, please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here at any conference that combines computers and quilting. I'm a fan of. And of course, we're here today, and last night it was a privilege to be here with the panel and to be able to hear the panel and the diversity talked about, and diversity in books and diversity in our lives is a meaningful way to enjoy this cornucopia of life. But we have reason to think about that as we go from this arc of Memorial Day to the 4th of July. And as we approach the 4th of July and that momentous document that is not a law, but is referred to as our creed, an opening to that, the preamble talks about things that we have goals to have. And one of the things that we have is happiness. It's listed in there. Happiness, as we would define it today, may not be the same happiness that was defined by our forefathers. It wouldn't be going on a vacation to the Hamptons, for instance, because there wouldn't have been any. What it meant to them, happiness, was being able to look forward and finding the pursuit of knowledge. And that's really what we celebrate here, happiness. So I hope I can keep this on that tone, and when you leave today, you will be happier for it, because we're here today because we love the idea of knowing and knowledge. And we're here surrounded by that love today. I have a studio in Ohio, in Terrace Park, Ohio, not far from Cincinnati. And at one point years ago, the Maz Museum wanted to do a tour, but they couldn't come to my studio because it's too small, and it has a spiral staircase, and some of the folks who are on their tours have walkers. So I did it in a remote location. But today, I'm going to take you to my studio. I'd like to welcome you to my studio. Today, we're going to go right inside. And my studio is a bedroom in my house, but it's not a bedroom because an artist works there. When I'm no longer there, years from now, it may revert to a bedroom, which is fine, but for the time I'm there, and when an artist is there, it's a studio. So, let's go. Today, that's me. Believe in the process, and welcome to my studio. Believe in the process was what my professor, Dr. Ken Moran, said when I studied at the Ohio State University. And so we move on. This is me. It's my thumbprint portrait. It has to be me because if you use your thumbprint, it can't be anybody else. And of course, artists do lots of self-portraits. And this just has 2 dots for eyes, a little squiggle for a nose, a line for a mouth, a blue chin, and some fuzzy hair. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and my background that'll help you understand how I am and how I got my voice as being a picture book artist. My mother said I was born with a pencil in my hand. And that is true. I've always enjoyed drawing as soon as I could hold a pencil. It was a way that I could see the world. It still is. As a child, you know, we're often very tactile. When I'm with my young friends, which are 4 or 5-year-olds, they often like to touch my shoes when I'm doing a story time. I think that helps me become real, but it also allows them to understand the physical world. An artist continues to understand the physical world by drawing it out, because we see better when we draw. We think we understand by drawing or writing, we see it better. And this is when I was in 1st grade. Actually, the most important things that put me in front of you today happened during this time. No one needs to tell me about the importance of early childhood. I lived it. We've all lived it, but we may not all remember it. Children populate our lives so they can continue to remind us of those connections we may have lost. I love bears. I love dogs. I love the animals that populate our world, and I was given a bear when I was a child. I still have my bear, but at one time my bear was bigger than me. Now, when I'm not in my studio, my bear likes to sit in my chair, and he likes to draw. He likes to draw what he knows. He draws bears, in this case, bears eating pears. I'm the youngest of 4. I'm sitting on my grandmother Hillenbrand's lap. She lived up the street. She was the only grandparent that survived into my childhood. I thought all grandparents lived up the street. My brothers are all born in the month of March, and we're celebrating their birthdays. Mine isn't, so I don't have a red shirt on. My oldest brother is Bob, then Rick, then Pete. And if you notice, I've got 1 shoe on and 1 shoe off. It wasn't my fault, Elkie. I had a runaway shoe. The 2 ladies that were really important to me are here. My dad is not in the picture because he's taking the picture. My grandmother Hillenbrand is sitting in his reading chair. He read aloud to us from that chair every night, whether we wanted him to or not. Often it was from the newspaper, but my favorite was when it was from a book. I'm going to talk about these 2 ladies. Before I do that, I want to let you know that when my dad was finished reading, he would take his reading lamp and turn it around backwards. I don't know why he did that. Maybe it kept the dust off of it. But I didn't go through the dining room then because I thought an eyeball was looking at me. My grandmother, Hillenbrand, who lived up the street, had something in common, and we both loved food. She was a great cook, and I loved eating whatever she made. But we were also frightened by thunderstorms. And whenever a storm came, when I was older, when I was younger, she would stay the night with us. When I was older, I would go with one of my brothers, and we'd spend the night with her. She had a spare bedroom. She was German. The sheets were ironed. The pillowcases were ironed. And there was talcum powder between the sheets because my brother Pete had stinky feet. When we crawled under the sheets, she asked what we wanted for breakfast. My mom would ask us what we wanted for breakfast when it was our birthday. My grandmother asked us what we wanted for breakfast every time we stayed. Why she asked, I don't know. My brother Pete always said pancakes. And then my grandmother would say, what story would you like to hear? Now, if you can imagine, the storm that we were awaiting was happening. The windows were rattling, and the panes of windows were getting dotted with rain, and lightning flashes were going on. We weren't afraid, of course, then, because we were with each other. Then my grandmother would say, what story would you like to hear? She read books to us, but now it wouldn't be from a book, it would be from a family story. And family stories are important because nobody owns those but the family. And being able to tell a family story well allows us to have roots to our own family. You don't need to have 50 or 100 stories to tell. My grandmother had 5. And we just asked for those 5 over and over. She would say, for instance, would you like to hear about Pepper? Pepper was my dog. I saved his life. This is a picture of Pepper. A dog worth saving for sure, and Walt Disney would have known that if he had heard this story. Or she would have said, would you like to hear the story about the voice in the woods? Now, when she was a little girl, she lived in Indiana, in rural Indiana, and when she went to school, she walked. She didn't take a bus. Buses weren't available. She would walk through the woods with her family and friends. At the end of the day, they would walk back home the same way. One day, she was naughty at school. She had to stay late. And everybody knows, and it's getting dark outside. It's already midnight inside the woods. And when she walked home this day, it was already midnight inside the woods. It may have looked like this. She thought she heard a voice. I can't tell you the rest of the story, but her stories were all like that. And I loved hearing every one. My mom, and when I was a child, we had a phone that looked like this. It was attached to the wall, no answering machine. It was between the kitchen and dining room. The answering machine looked like this. Elke was using one earlier. And so my drawing table, because we had a 2-bedroom house, Mom and Dad had 1 bedroom, we had the other, the 4 boys, that was just fine. That wasn't uncommon either. When I wanted to draw after the evening meal, I needed to do the dishes, clean the table, wipe it clean, and the phone was nearby. I didn't answer the phone when it rang, but I could overhear those conversations. And after my mom had one conversation one evening, I noticed she did a drawing. I was drawing, but her drawing was something I couldn't imagine I could draw. It made me want to see it myself. So, over the course of the next following days, I wondered what I needed to do. One evening again, I sat down at the kitchen table to draw, but I got up and I walked into the living room. My mom, who had been working at home, she was a stay-at-home mom. She had done laundry, cooked meals, cleaned the house, gone to the grocery store, and maybe 10 other things. She was sitting in her lazy boy chair, rocking away and crocheting. I walked up to her with a blank piece of paper. I was going to draw on it, but now I wanted to see how it was really done. I asked her to draw for me. She could have said, I never had a drawing teacher. She could have said, I'm busy. She could have said, I'm watching my program. But what I was saying to her was I loved her. And I wanted to be the only person in the world to her. I wanted to be in her lap, and I had one small request. I wanted to see magic. She obliged. She drew this, but now I'm going to show it to you the way I saw it. She labeled everything she drew. She said, these are the hills of home. She grew up in Indiana as well. She said, these woods are the woods that I walked through when I went to school, just like my grandmother. A different house, but through the woods, still the same. They had a farm, so they had a large barn. So she drew the barn. Behind the barn was her house. Smoke always came out of the chimney because that's how they heated the house. Of course, with a cook stove, that's how they heated their water and cooked their food. Smoke always came out of the chimney. They grew their crops. So on the far side, she said, we planted them in the spring. We weeded them in the summer, and we harvested those in the fall. We were never hungry. She drew a small paddock in front of the barn, where they had, she put an oval, triangle ears, square nose, straight legs, and a curly tail, and she said, that's my pig. That was my pet pig, and his name was Oogie. And Oogie was her pet pig, and she finished it, and she said, when she came home from school, and she was older, and the pig was older, the pig would wait for her, and she would give it an ear of corn through the fence. It would say Oogie, that was the word it said, that's how it got its name. It would turn sideways, and then she could ride Oogie around the barnyard like she was riding an ATV, but it was a pig. And she said, I would ride it around like I was a little cowgirl, but I said, Mom, you weren't. You're a little pig girl. And we laughed, and we never forgot it. That was a seminal moment for me, because what happened was, before she drew on that piece of paper, it was a blank piece of paper. After she was finished, it was her home. And I knew where important artwork went. It didn't go to the Mazza Museum. It went to the refrigerator. And I put the artwork up there. And there's Oogie. And here's my mom, so you actually know she did have a pig. And she saved its life because it was a runt of the litter. And this was before Charlotte's Web. My mom, when she turned 80 years old, she said, what do you want for your birthday? I said, Mom, really, I have everything I need, except I'd love for you to draw for me. But I'm too big to fit in your lap. So she drew this. Now her primitive home became a Tudor mansion with a stone bridge We love kite flying in our family, so she put a kite there. But at the bottom, there's Oogie, and there's Oogie, and Oogie has a friend. There's another story there, I'm sure, but I'm not going to tell it. When my mom turned 90 years old, it was my turn to draw for her. So I did this picture for her birthday announcement. Any resemblance that pig has to my oldest brother, Bob, is just merely coincidental. But when you're still the one drawing in your family, you get to tell the story. I grew up in the city, not on the farm, and my house is in the center of this picture, and you can see how it's developed here. Everything was in the neighborhood. Mrs. Schlanzer was to one side, Mrs. Smart to the other, the Boggses lived there, everybody knew each other. I didn't draw this picture with the trees in the neighborhood, we had those, but you can't see the trees, you can't see the houses if I drew the trees. I met my wife there when I was less than a month old, and she was a little bit younger, but that's another story. And our house is the one right in the center. When I was a child, and my brothers were in school, and we walked to the grocery store, my mom met a friend from church. And my mom and my mom's friend, talked for a long time, and I had to be very patient and wait, and wait, and wait. And then I was ready for this question, because most children are asked this, and college graduates are asked it too. If you could be anything when you grow up, what would you be? I knew that question was coming. So I'm not going to tell you what I wanted to be. I'm going to show you. And of course, this is it. This is what I wanted to be when I was 5 years old. Tell me, what do you see? Now everybody goes quiet. Yes. I wanted to grow up to be a fire truck. That's what I told her. And she said, you mean you want to be a firefighter? I said, no, ma'am, I want to be the truck. And that ended that long conversation. And when we walked home, my mom said, why did you say that? And I said, well, red's my favorite color. Back then it was. And a fire truck has its own house. I wouldn't have to share a bedroom with my brothers. It helps people in trouble. It comes with a dog. And if my brothers ever gave me a hard time, I could squirt them down. Fortunately, I never needed to do that. But it has a book connection, because I could never have thought of that without having read Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, Mary Ann. And that allowed me to understand that objects could come to life. So I read more. I read about Katie and the Big Snow. I read all the Virginia Lee Burton books that I could find at the library that was just 1 block away. In my backyard in my house in the city, we made snowmen. I love a snowy day still today, and in southern Ohio, we don't get as much snow as you do in Findlay or in Michigan or any of the northern states. But I love snow because, well, as a child, I used to wait when it would melt, and often in southern Ohio, it didn't take long for it to melt. I'd wait by the drain, and I thought the snow would melt white. It didn't. It was clear. How could it be white and not melt white? I have a red jacket on in this picture that I got from the rummage sale at St. Clair Church. It cost 75 cents, but I bargained it down to 50 cents because that was my snow shoveling money. I had a winter jacket. I wanted a red one because my friend had one, and we're often wanting things that we see that are set as high fashion. And so that red jacket is what I wanted. But if you notice, I didn't need to buy a pair of gloves because the jacket was way too long. And I wanted a red jacket because my friend Peter had one. And here's a picture of Peter. And he's in a book called The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. I just noticed, of course, that Peter was a friend. Later, I found out he had a different color skin than I had. It made no difference. And in this picture, and I've seen the original artwork at the Carl Museum in Massachusetts. And if you notice in the beginning of this book, and you can see it on the cover, Peter makes footprints in the snow. They go this way, then that way. He takes a stick and he makes a line, hits a tree, and snow falls on his head. Children love that part. I did too. But if you look at the picture here where it says, and he made angels, do you see any footprints? Of course, you don't miss them because he's making angels. And in the child's imagination, angels don't walk away. They have wings. And that's a part of visual literacy that you bring to life when you make that choice as an illustrator. Is that a mistake? It's not a photograph. It's the imagination. And it connects so directly with your imagination. I maybe have ruined this picture for you forever because I showed you that. My magic place when I was a child was this building a block and a half away from my house. It was called the Northern Hills Library. It was right next to the baseball diamond. I often went to the baseball diamond after I went to the library first. And I did so because I always met my friends there. I had wild friends. I had wild things that were friends. I had friends that liked to fly kites that were frogs and toads. My favorite poet ever as a child was named Frederick. I met all my friends there, and I still have my friends at the library. When I was a child on TV, I had another friend, Captain Kangaroo. Some of you may know Captain Kangaroo, but he also had a dancing bear and Mr. Green Jeans. My favorite part of that program, if you remember, was the magic drawing board. Magic drawing board was blank. It started with a mark, and then you could guess what it might become. What it became, in this case, was a lion. I love that part. I look forward to it. It took a blank piece of paper and made it into meaning. So as a child, where did I see art? Art museums? Well, not with my family. Libraries? Well, not with my family. I didn't go to the art museum with my parents until I took them when I was in art school years later. And they never took me to Story Hour. They just said the library is a block and a half away, and I could walk there. So where did I see art? Well, let me tell you a little bit about that. In first grade, I was in College Hill Public Library. I saw art because we traveled by bus to go to the Cincinnati Art Museum. But the art that I saw there was roped off. The docent that I had didn't tell the story of art. They didn't tell the story of an artist or how it was made or the time when it was made. It just seemed strange. I remember waiting for the bus underneath this sculpture, and I couldn't wait to leave because I thought that sculpture may come to life, and that would be the end of me. Second grade through eighth grade, I went to St. Clair Catholic School. It's a beautiful building, the church. My art table was this table, and the art was on a cart. We value things by giving them space. I don't have to tell you, J.K. Rowling doesn't have to tell you that Harry Potter wasn't valued because we know where his original bedroom was. That's showing and not telling. She showed us the way, and when we don't make space for things that are important, we put them on carts and don't grant them space. I ended up getting this always to start the artwork with. It was a way to keep the table clean, which was my desk, and we were instructed to be able to make art that might have looked like this, and all the art we made in that time all looked the same. It was like clones even before computers. We advanced our artistic skills at one point because we were given a three-dimensional object to add to it, macaroni. My favorite kind of creations look like this because I could look at them at many different angles. In senior high was the first time that I had a trained art teacher that taught art. The nuns, of course, were trained to be able to teach, but not to teach art. I went to the Taft Museum, and at Taft Museum, I was introduced to the artwork that was there, and that the docent did beautifully. The artwork in my life at that time in high school looked like this, and the art teacher that I had, Mr. Attell, just passed away. He was 99 and a quarter years old. He passed away about 2 months ago, and we still send Christmas cards because and actually, I sent him always a card at Thanksgiving because without him, I wouldn't be here today. And that's a picture. Now, if you notice my pants, I don't have a belt on, I have elastic there. Elkie, that was never fashionable. So I'm glad I don't have this. But this is Mr. Ertel, fabulous man. And he got to know us all extremely well. And he was not my natural father, but he was my aesthetic father. And he always had a way to get my attention. And when I had a show at the public library downtown Cincinnati, he came. It was a snowy day. Most of my family didn't travel in the snow, but he did. I wish books would grow on trees. They're made of trees. And I wish we all had a way to be able to pluck one off like an apple. We do at the public library. And for those that we love, we hand them the things that we love because we want that to continue. We want their worlds to be bigger than the limited world they would have without books or stories or knowing the greater world or the diversity that it holds and to be able to embrace it and celebrate it. No one can pick out our favorite piece of music. No one can pick out our favorite book. We choose it, and children choose it by saying the single word again. My son's favorite book was The Mole Family Christmas. So we give them a huge variety. He chose this for again and again and again. And there he is. Well, he read that book so often. Of course, too many words in there for him to read it when he was 5, so it was read aloud, but he role-played it. And so when it snowed, he went outside and became a mole and started tunneling in the snows like a mole. When he got cold, he came inside and started making a tunnel down to the furnace. He didn't get very far, but when he was doing that, I took his picture and I thought, I should make a picture. His birthday was coming, so what can I do that nobody else can do? I thought I would do his portrait. So I need you to put your hands to your cheeks. I need you to say, aw. Children in kindergarten do much better than that, so I'm going to ask you to do it again. Ready? Aw. Okay, now I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and you'll see his portrait. I hope you think it looks just like him. Ready? 1, 2, 3. You can say aw when I do it. 1, 2, 3. Aw. So I drew him how he imagined himself because I still remembered myself as a fire truck. And I drew him that as that, and I gave him that artwork. But when you're 5 years old and you get a piece of artwork, it's not very much fun to play with. So I made it, copied it, Kinko's, and made it for his T-shirt so it was branded, and put it on his book bag so he could put his book inside of it. Of course, he's outgrown that. But my editor saw this picture when I sent it to her saying, this is the most recent picture of Ian. And she sent me a blank contract and said, now write a picture book for that picture. And I did so with my wife, and that became the first book I did with my wife called What a Treasure, modeled after that mole. Now that moles do grow up, and mine just graduated from Bates College in Maine last year, and this is a picture of him. He graduated Elke as a geologist, so he still loves rocks and dirt and soil. And our interests always point to what our greater interest is. He's also in this book called Spring is Here, and so he's the mole, a different mole. But what happened one morning, my wife taught kindergarten. She would leave very early in the morning. I'd work late at night. We tag team to take care of our son. So he'd wake up in the morning and say, wake up time to me. That night I'd worked very late, and I didn't wake up, I just snored. So he came real close to my ear and he pulled on it and he said, wake up time, and I just snored. He took a feather from the feather pillow and he tickled my chin. He said, wake up time, I snored. Now I was awake, but I was still tired. And then he knocked on my head and he said, wake up time, tapped 3 times, and I still snored, maybe louder. He stepped back and was a little frustrated. Then he went to the bottom of the bed, got the sheets loose, pretended he was a little mole. And this picture isn't him, but it's kind of like what he did. And he tunneled underneath the sheets and he pinched my big toe. I told him, wake up time. And I made him a big breakfast. And then we went to his favorite playground, which overlooks the Ohio River. Quite lovely. He played and played, and when it was time to go home, we got in the car, and he told me, he said, tell me a story. I said, I'll put one on the cassette player, and he said, no, because he was asking me the same thing I'd asked my mom years ago. It was just a new iteration. He said, tell me a story, which means make one up. I told him, I do lots of stories, I already knew that, but I said, I couldn't think of any right now, and he pouted, and that broke my heart. So in panic, I thought, what can I do? And I said, I don't know many stories, but I know one about a little mole. And he smiled because he knew that story now would be about him. And I said his best friend was a bear. I said, and his best friend is, and he said, a bear. Now I've got 2 characters, but no story. So I panicked for a moment longer, and then what I did was I just rewound the day. And decided to tell him the story about how that little mole wakes up a sleepy, snoring bear. And he must have liked that story, but by the time we got home, he was asleep. I went upstairs, and there was no computer to draw on at that time, so I drew in my journal, and this is the first drawing of the bear and mole. Now, I also drew out a sketch very quickly of the rest of the story because I didn't intend this to be published. I just did this because if he asked me again and again, I would actually have a concrete idea of how to retell this story. At the end of the story, the mole who tried to wake up the bear worked so hard that the mole would be asleep and the bear would be awake. I sent this idea, we had a conference for the American Library Association, and I told the story to my editor, and she said, make it into a book. And so I did. Now looks do count. What I've shown you up until this point, that doesn't matter, but now it's like casting characters for a movie, and looks do count. So I do them all again, and again, and again, and again. Then finally adding color to be able to think what I wanted to do. This was far enough, because now I need to do the bear. And the bear, I like quite a lot. And I was skeptical because usually things don't work out the first time, so I decided to keep drawing. And the second bear I drew laughed at the first one. I knew he wouldn't be right. I did a costume change and put the bear into pajamas, and this one worked. Now, whenever you see a book, you see the characters, they should just work. But when you're making them, you have to work it out. Of course, in the story, I do change it because they're not going to be waking up because they're going to the playground. A bear sleeps all winter because they'll wake up because the crocuses are kissing the sun. And then I redrew the storyboard from that early iteration. And because this artwork is narrative, page after page comes together in a concert of drawing to be able to make a composition of a story. That's made into a book dummy that's sent to my publisher, and then after they see it, I get to color my world. But they look at this, which is the book dummy. No color work except for some samples are done before this. But if you now stare at the screen, and now I'm just going to go ahead and touch it one more time here and let you see what it looks like in color. I always call that a promise, and the color work is a promise that's kept. Because as an editor, if you were receiving something as a sketch, you don't want to be surprised except delighted, but not surprised. So here we go again, the promise and the promise kept. So how does this happen? Because it does take longer than that, Elke, to make it happen. So All for a Dime is another book on the bear and mole story. And in this case, what I'm going to be doing is drawing it out. I'm going to use traditional media. In this case, I'm using a sanguine pencil. It's on vellum, a transparent piece of paper. And my eraser will be Scotch tape because with vellum, there's no tooth to the paper. So if you want to remove the drawing, if you use Scotch tape, snowman story. And as we continue on, so what does this mean? As I introduced my studio early on, now my studio can be on an airplane. Now my studio can be at a coffee shop. I'm not ball and chained to my studio. I don't think this generation wants that. I don't. I still love having a studio, but I also love being able to be untethered. And communications to the classroom can change as well, but in this case, what happens is it unlocks the potential for what you can see when you see it, and to be able to make magic happen. I do a program called Ask 10 for classrooms and for colleges and libraries, where students ask me 10 questions, and I answer them with a video link response using Adobe Spark Video. And this is what that looks like. Ask 10 is also using technology to allow me to visit those classrooms that wouldn't ordinarily be able to afford an author visit. I'm going to skip past this. Maybe I'll come back to it, but I'm going to go to Bear in Love and let you know that when I did this book, I'm going to work from the manuscript, and in this case, doing sketches in my sketchbook, and making many drawings on one page is the way that I can make bridges between pictures. I thought that would be the bear, but the bear I wanted to do was just above. And then when I did the drawing of it, it changes just a little bit. In color, the artwork looks like this. I did a second book with Daniel Pinkwater called Bear and Bunny. And what I do with this book is much the same. Being able to, when I'm not the author of the words, I have to get to know the world of the words. And how that works is that I read and think. And then I reread again and think again. And then I walk the story. A famous artist named Paul Klee said, "A line is a dot that went for a walk." I actually walk the story. And I do that so I can look to see. And what does that mean? Well, this little video shows you a little bit about that. So it's a literal walk, getting away and allowing the ideas to sink in so I can draw it out. So I'll go from this drawing to this art. And this drawing was a drawing that was done on the iPad. You can see it here in the portfolio. You can see the sketch, and then you can actually see my hand in making it. And the final art, you don't need to know that it's more virtuous or not because it's been done one technique or another. It just needs to work. I'm going to skip past the book trailer here so I can continue on with me and Annie McPhee. And this was a drawing I did on the couch in my living room, but the color work was done at Talbot's as my wife was trying on some dresses. So you might see the Talbot's color palette within the figures here because artists can't help but look around and see. That's part of that whole mobile studio. And I add the colors. I can also alter the colors here. And so what do I do with this? This isn't going to live in my computer like this. I'm going to send it to the cloud. And so when I send it to the cloud and I bring it to my Wacom tablet, you'll be able to see there they are. Now they're in a bigger landscape, but I've done those drawings. And I can still go in and edit them layer by layer in case I want to change the color of the binoculars or something like that. I'm not changing the whole picture. This is a larger tablet with many more layers, and I'm using Photoshop to do this element, and that's where these technologies blend and scaffold up and then scaffold back out to be able to complete the process. Because a picture book needs to be consistent from beginning to end with costuming and clothing and setting. I often being able to have this available where I can digitally copy the things that I have to make them consistent. It's just a natural way to use technology. And let me see, I'm making sure, I'm trying to stay on time, so I'm going to move past this book trailer and come to, in fact, I'm going to scoot ahead a little bit more here, Elke. So I'm going to come to a new book that is one of the Bear and Mole Story books. It's right here. Or not Bear and Mole Story, but we'll go to this one, which is the newest of the Big Bear stories, which is Share, Big Bear, Share. And so again, here the first drawing was done traditionally. This is for the cover. All the drawings after this you're going to see were all done on the iPad. And this bear is not wanting to share these blueberries that he loves. So you can see lines matter. Expression matters. Often people say you look like your art. I don't know if I do. I don't know if I look like a bear. But maybe how can I help it? Because I have to look in the mirror to get the expressions that I want, because I can't go to the zoo and ask a bear to pose for me. And so I come back to the beginning sketch to this, and then how do I use it? Because after all, this is just a drawing, it's not in color. The color work was done in Procreate, and now you can see how it's painted. I'm going to skip beyond because I'm getting close on time. So I'm going to go to the book that's not out yet, which is called I'm a Duck. It'll be out next year at this time too. And again, you can see these are Adobe Sketch. I use Adobe Sketch and Adobe and Procreate interchangeably, just like not every program you have does everything. So I'll jump through the hoops. But that would have been the front cover, and they asked me to add a color background, so I did from another painting. And the title was put in. And it was sent to the covers meeting, and they said they loved the color, but they wanted the duck to be a little bit bigger. Now imagine if you were doing that with traditional media. What would you do? You could say, well, just make the duck bigger and everything else, but they just want the duck bigger. So actually, look at this closely, stare at it, and you'll see there's the bigger duck. It works better, but how do you do that? And so what happens is I can just make the duck disappear. I can grab it on a single layer and make it now bigger than it needs to be. All to do that. The changes that you have as an artist is either redo the art if you do it traditionally to make that change, or argue the point and not really understand what's being asked, or have ways to do this. This allows me to listen better. So I do traditional sketching and use those for my book dummies, and then I'll go ahead and redraw those in the digital format, and you can see again here many iterations of the same page. This picture here will end up showing you from the beginning sketch to the final how it changes and how the brush works all come together to make the color work happen. Now we're getting close. We've got about 5-6 minutes to go. In Procreate, you can just simply tell the application to record your art. So this can work on your phone. There's an application for your phone or your tablet, and so you can see how this works. And if a child wants to see, if you have a child who likes to do their artwork, let them do their drawing, and they can actually see how it was made. So I'm going to back out of this so you can see this video. So there's my tablet, and there's Adobe Photoshop Sketch. And those are my portfolios as the artwork that we just looked at, and to be able to explain again the idea of the layers or how I use the applications. I've done the application there, and I'm going to import that into Procreate, and I'm going to do some more of the drawings so you can see the changes of layers and colors and editing I can do there. Now, all this probably wouldn't be worthwhile unless we heard a little bit of the story. So I'm going to let you get a sneak preview. This is the world premiere of the story, and after all, I'm a story person, so hearing this,
I'm a Duck by Eve Bunting, illustrated by Will Hillenbrand, read by Will Hillenbrand. When I was just an egg, I'm told, I left my nest and rolled and rolled. My mother clapped a frightened clack, then dived in deep and brought me back. Now I'm a duck who's scared to go in the pond or lake in so. I cannot swim, and that is bad. A landlocked duck is very sad. My brothers swimming in a line shout, "Come on in, the water's fine." But I might sink and end up drowned, never ever to be found. My friend Big Frog told me today, I promise you'll be okay. Just sliding fast, don't even think you're a duck, and ducks don't sink. I take a walk beside the pond, then waddle just a bit beyond to talk to Owl, who's very wise, and ask him, what do you advise? He studies me, to think about what you can do. You're a duck. Use common sense and try to get some confidence. It's true, if I could know for sure that I could swim, I'd feel secure. I'll find a puddle. It will be the perfect practice place for me. I puddle swim by day and night. It's nice to swim by pale moonlight. My mother brings me out a snack. She dries my feathers, rubs my back. The pond is waiting there below. It's whispering, "Come on in, let's go." But even though I'm well prepared, I'm really scared. Frog is sitting on a big fat stone. If you're afraid to try alone, I'll hold your wing and dive in too. If it makes it easier for you, I'd love to have you help me through it, but I'm the one who has to do it. I pause, a quiver for a minute, then hold my beak and flop right in it. My friends are joyous, frog is too. Owl calls out, "To-it-too." My mother's jumping up and down and blowing kisses all around. I'm swimming. Oh my gosh. I find that ducks are perfectly designed. I was wrong to ever think a well-made duck like me could sink. I do the backstroke. There are cheers, so loud they almost hurt my ears. The other ducks shout, "Way to go," as I do the backstroke to and fro. We swim together in a line. We're doing absolutely fine. No one says my stroke is strange or asks if I will ever change. Wasn't it fantastic luck that I grew up to be a duck?
that's your sneak preview. There are more books that I'll be working on, but I want to end with this, and that is, books give us wings. As a community of learners and lovers of learning all about the world and all of its diversity, we get wings. Stories give us wings and confidence and allow us to see the world anew. Isn't that what artists always do? Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Get your wings. And now, if you want to speak to me, I don't have any time for questions now. I'll have sessions, as Elke talked about, later today and tomorrow. And I do have some material, promotional material up here if you want to know more about that. So I'd like to end with being able to say thank you so much for your time.
How about now? Yes. Thank you so much, everybody. This is our last large group meeting together, so thank you again. I did want to recognize one person that I have been remiss in